You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Friday, February 14th, 2020. It is also the feast day of St. Valentine and also the feast day of St. Cyril and Methodius. This week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we have been talking about the sacrament of anointing of the sick. We talked about how Jesus instituted this sacrament, what happens at the sacrament of anointing of the sick, and then we started talking about powerful intercessors. We've talked about Saint Lidwina, who intercedes oftentimes for those suffering from chronic pain. We talked about Saint Dymphna, who intercedes for those with mental illness. And today we are going to talk about the patron saint of cancer patients, and this is Saint Peregrine. Now, Saint Peregrine lived in the 1200s in Italy, and she has a bit of an interesting story. So when he was a young man, he was very much against religion and against the Catholic Church. In fact, there was a religious uprising when he was a young man, and he was demonstrating, and he got so furious that he went up and he punched a priest. Now, this priest went on to be a saint, so he was a good guy. So instead of getting mad and hitting back, this priest simply turned to him in love, did not fight back, but turned to him in love. Now, St. Peregrine was so impressed by this. He couldn't believe that this man wouldn't fight back or at least yell at him. So he went home, and this moment changed the rest of his life. He started to look into the faith, and he began to feel a calling to become a priest himself. Eventually, he joined a Franciscan order. He was ordained a priest, and he started to take on extreme penances, meaning he recognized all of the sins that he had committed as a young man, and he wanted to make up for those, to make his soul more pure and more pleasing to God. So he took on little penances. And one of the things that he did was that unless it was absolutely necessary, he refused to sit down. So you wouldn't find him sitting on a couch all evening. Unless he had to sit down, for example, at a meal, he would remain standing. And if you've ever stood all day long, you know that this can be a real penance, that your feet get tired and your legs get tired. But he offered that pain to God as a present. Now, time went on, and eventually St. Peregrine realized that he had a growth or an abscess on one of his legs. This was a long time ago, so medicine was not as advanced, but a doctor looked at it and thought for sure that this was cancer. And he also said that Peregrine would have to lose his entire leg. Now, this wasn't the end of the world, but remember, St. Peregrine stood all the time if he could, and he gave that suffering to God as a gift. This would have been a terrible blow. This was how he was loving God, by standing all the time. So that night, St. Peregrine went to sleep, and he prayed fervently that God would answer his prayer and not take his life or even take his leg through the disease of cancer. In his dream that night, he dreamt that Jesus came off of the cross and touched his leg. When he awoke in the morning, his leg was completely healed and the cancer was gone. In fact, St. Peregrine went on to live a long life. He didn't die until he was 85 years old, and he died peacefully in his sleep. So St. Peregrine is oftentimes asked to intercede for people when they have cancer. And once again, St. Peregrine has been known to procure amazing, miraculous healings for those that are suffering. And so, Sprouts, today let's finish out this week talking about anointing of the sick by praying for those in our life that are suffering with illness. Wherever you are, whether you are in your classroom or with your family, I encourage you to talk about those that you need to pray for. those that are struggling with cancer, those that maybe have other illnesses or have been hurt recently, those that maybe have mental illness, even women that are suffering in pregnancy or newborn babies. All of these people, they are great people to remember in prayer. And we are called to be like those people in the gospel that brought their sick to Jesus, no matter how big the crowd was. Even if they had to take the roof off of a building, they were going to bring their sick to Jesus. So be like that. Bring the sick that you know to Jesus. Support them in prayer and ask one of these powerful interceders, Saint Ludwina, Saint Dymphna, Saint Peregrine, ask them to take care of this person. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God created you to be. Hey there, Sprouts. It is such a joy to serve you with this podcast, but I have a quick favor to ask. Please consider sharing this podcast with someone you know and love that might also enjoy learning about their faith. You can do this by word of mouth, text, or message, but let's get as many young saints listening to this podcast as possible. Thanks for the help.